So welcome to One Hero a Day, where everyday courage lives on. Like and subscribe to hear a new story each night. There are mornings when the world feels stiller than usual, when the light slants a little softer through the windows, when the footsteps in a hallway carry a quiet rhythm that seems to echo longer than they should. On one such morning, the sun rose over Birchwood Elementary, with no hint of what would unfold. It was calm, predictable, familiar. Miguel Torres, the school's security guard, had arrived early, as always. He walked the halls with the same steady pace, greeting the janitor with a nod, checking the locks on the rear doors, glancing through the blinds of the cafeteria. Most didn't notice him. That was part of the job. He wasn't meant to stand out, just to be present, just to see what others didn't. Miguel wasn't a large man, nor particularly loud. His voice rarely rose above a low murmur. His uniform was clean, his shoes always quiet. What made him effective wasn't force. It was presence, a kind of stillness that made others feel safe without quite knowing why. On this particular Tuesday, students trickled in under the faint gray of an overcast sky. The air smelled like morning dew and cafeteria toast. Parents kissed their children goodbye at the curb. Teachers buzzed about lesson plans and permission slips. It was picture day for third grade. Bright collars and nervous smiles lined the classrooms. Miguel did his rounds as always, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning gently. He noticed the stray backpack near the art room, reminded a boy to tie his shoes before running, and picked up a fallen apple without a second thought. No alarms, no warnings. Nothing to mark this day as different. But sometimes the difference isn't loud. Sometimes it moves quietly at the edges. At 8:47 a.m., Miguel stood near the western stairwell, sipping coffee from a dented thermos. His eyes drifted through the glass pane above the front doors. A car sat idling just beyond the school gates, its engine humming low. The driver didn't move. The car had no school sticker, no bumper scuffs, too clean. Miguel narrowed his eyes slightly, but didn't raise an alarm. Not yet. A dozen parents came and went every day. This could be nothing. Still, something in his gut tugged, faintly. He noted the time. 8:48 a.m. Inside, classroom doors closed as attendance began. Outside, the car stayed put. Miguel took another sip, watching the slow curl of exhaust rise into the cold air. His other hand, the one not holding the thermos, had already moved toward the small walkie on his hip, just in case. And in that breath, that quiet moment before sound, the stillness held. Unaware that history had already begun to shift, a breath, a still hallway, and a man watching. Miguel Torres was not supposed to be here. At least, that's what he sometimes told himself. In another version of his life, one not marked by loss and compromise, he might have been a mechanic, or perhaps still back home in El Paso, repairing motorcycles in the desert heat. But life had other plans. It moved him east, to a small city with a small school, where the past could be quieter and the days predictable. He had taken the job at Birchwood Elementary 2 years earlier. It came with steady hours, decent pay, and the kind of daily routine that didn't ask too much from a man who had already given plenty. Every morning, he walked the same halls, past the colorful murals painted by students, past the dusty trophies of long-forgotten softball games, past the nurse's office that always smelled faintly of hand sanitizer and bubble gum. He learned quickly which door hinges squeaked, which children forgot their coats, which teachers left coffee mugs dangerously close to the edge of their desks. He also learned when something was off. Miguel wasn't a talker, but he was a listener, and in the silence of school walls, he could sense changes like a barometer senses storms. That morning, after noticing the idling car, he continued his rounds, slow, steady, thinking. He checked the locks on the side entrances again, not because they needed checking, but because he needed movement to match the thoughts stirring behind his calm expression. The car still hadn't moved. At 8:52 a.m., he returned to the front office and asked the secretary, Mrs. Bicknell, if she recognized the black sedan parked by the main gate. She leaned over, squinted through the glass, and shook her head. "Probably a parent," she said lightly. "Sometimes they just sit there, waiting for a call or something." Miguel didn't argue, but he didn't walk away either. Instead, he stepped outside. The air was colder than it looked. The grass was stiff with early frost. Miguel walked slowly along the side path, appearing as if he were inspecting the hedges, which he often did. The angle allowed him a better view of the sedan. No school sticker, tinted windows. The driver sat motionless, both hands on the wheel, eyes ahead. Miguel lingered for a few seconds more, then returned inside. Still no need for panic, but the knot in his stomach tightened. At 9:03 a.m., the car door opened. The man who stepped out looked ordinary. Jeans, dark jacket, a cap pulled low. He could have passed for a substitute teacher or a father running late. But Miguel's eyes went first to the man's hands and stayed there, empty, but twitchy. The man walked with a certain purpose, a strange sort of stiffness in his stride, like someone rehearsing calm rather than feeling it. He passed the outer gate, hands in his pockets, eyes flicking toward the entry keypad. Miguel didn't hesitate. He moved quickly to the front vestibule, pressing the button that signaled a soft internal lockdown. Not a full alarm, just a quiet signal to lock classroom doors and hold students inside. Teachers would think it was a drill. That was fine. Better safe than sorry. At 9:05, the man tried the main door. Locked. He knocked. Miguel stepped forward and opened the small intercom panel next to the glass. "Can I help you, sir?" The man didn't answer right away. He looked up, eyes half-shadowed beneath his cap. "I forgot my kid's lunch," he said finally. His voice didn't match his body. It came out too flat, too rehearsed. Miguel didn't move. "What's your child's name?" A pause, then a name. "Jason." No last name. "We have a few Jasons," Miguel said. His fingers hovered over the silent alarm beneath the front desk. "Last name?" Another pause. This time, the man looked past Miguel, into the hallway behind him. That was all Miguel needed. In one motion, he hit the silent alarm and placed his hand subtly near his holster. Not to draw, just to be ready. "We'll check with the office," he said, his voice calm. "Please wait outside." But the man didn't wait. His hand moved inside his jacket, quick, practiced. Miguel slammed the bolt lock in place just as the first sound cracked through the glass. Not a knock, a gunshot. The bullet tore through the corner of the door frame, splintering wood and shattering silence. Inside the school, children looked up from books and crayons. Teachers froze mid-sentence. A different kind of quiet settled over the building. Sharp, alert, waiting. Miguel turned from the vestibule and started running. Past the library, past the music room, toward the cafeteria, where he knew third grade was finishing snack time. His feet echoed in the hall, but he barely heard them. All he could hear was the thought, quiet but clear. Not this time. Not these kids. Miguel had been trained for this. At least that's what the manual said. But no manual prepares you for the sound of your own heartbeat thundering against the walls of a hallway where children are hiding behind cardboard science projects and shelves of picture books. No training tells you what to do when the air smells like gunpowder and cafeteria milk at the same time. His boots pounded down the polished corridor, slipping slightly on a patch of juice near the vending machine. He steadied himself without breaking stride. Somewhere behind him, another gunshot cracked the air. Louder, closer. Miguel didn't look back. He reached the cafeteria doors and threw them open. The room was large, echoing. Bright posters lined the walls, advertising Kindness Month and healthy lunch choices. At the far end of the room, a cluster of third graders stood frozen near a row of long tables, eyes wide, trays abandoned on the floor. 19 children, all watching him. The teacher wasn't there. Maybe in the hallway when the shots began. Maybe helping another student. Miguel didn't have time to wonder. "Come to me," he said softly, firmly. They didn't move. Fear rooted them. Then one little girl, pigtails trembling, stepped forward. Then another. Then a wave of small bodies surged toward him, clinging to each other like driftwood in a storm. Miguel didn't think. He scanned the room, saw a low row of serving tables stacked against the wall, and beside them, a maintenance cart with a wheeled desk used for lunchtime announcements. He dragged it toward the children. "Behind the desk, now!" Some obeyed instantly, crawling on hands and knees. Others had to be gently pushed, nudged, lifted. Miguel flipped the desk onto its side with one heave, creating a shallow shield. It wasn't bulletproof, he knew that. But it might deflect or slow something. Anything. He crouched low, arms wide, guiding them behind the barrier. Another shot rang out, closer. Then came the sound of shattering glass in the hallway. Not just one window, several in rapid succession. The gunman was moving, searching. Miguel slid into place in front of the desk, his back to the hallway, his body between the noise and the children. One hand pressed against the edge of the desk to keep it steady. The other hovered near his radio. He whispered into the crack, "Stay low. Don't move. I'm right here." They didn't speak. They didn't cry. Just breathing. Software shaky, 19 small hearts, learning what silence really meant. The hallway fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that presses into your ears and refuses to leave. Miguel could hear the gunman's steps now. Not running, walking, deliberate. He was close, maybe 10 feet away. Miguel could feel every part of his own body. The sweat cooling under his arms, the tremble in his right leg, where he had once taken a fall during a night shift years ago. His heart beat too loud. He feared it might give them away. And yet he didn't move. He didn't flinch. The thought came again, clearer this time. If he fires again, let it hit me, not them. He'd never thought of himself as a hero, not even close. He was just a man who walked the halls, fixed broken locks, and kept kids from running in stairwells. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was staying still, staying between. Another creak. A shadow shifted against the hallway wall. Miguel closed his eyes for a breath. The door creaked open. One slow inch. Then, a pause. He braced for the sound, for the flash. But it didn't come. Not yet. Just the faintest breath from one of the children behind him, a stifled whimper. Miguel's hand gripped the side of the desk tighter. Then, a single bullet cracked through the cafeteria's front window. The children flinched. Miguel did not. The bullet struck the far end of the cafeteria, embedding itself in a metal tray dispenser. A sharp clang rang out, bouncing off the tiled walls like an alarm bell. Miguel didn't move. He couldn't afford to. Movement drew attention. Movement got you noticed. Behind him, a boy's breath hitched, loud enough to make Miguel flinch inwardly. He reached back without turning, just a steady hand over the edge of the desk. Not to silence, not to hush, but to reassure. A small palm found his. It held on, then another. He didn't look to see whose hands they were. He didn't need to. The seconds crawled by. Then, faintly, from somewhere deeper in the hallway, came the buzz of a loudspeaker. It crackled, then popped. "Code Blue," the principal's voice said, steady but trembling at the edges. "Repeat. Code Blue in effect. All rooms locked. All students secured." Miguel knew that voice. Mr. Kaplan, mid-50s, decent guy, usually upbeat in the mornings. That voice now was brittle, like something made of glass and breath. The shooter would have heard it too. Might even know what it meant. Miguel's radio crackled again. A whisper from Officer Rene, stationed 2 blocks away. "Units en route, 5 minutes." Too long, Miguel thought. Way too long. The sound of footsteps moved again. Not fast, but closer. Coming from the west side now, the corridor that looped back toward the cafeteria's other door. Miguel's mind raced. That door, had he locked it? He couldn't remember. Not for sure. It had a keypad, but the latch sometimes stuck. He'd meant to fix it last week. He shifted his weight, preparing to move, to check. But then just faintly, he heard a sound from the door itself. A rattle. Then silence. Miguel pressed his hand flat against the desk's side and exhaled slowly. No rush. Think. If the shooter came through that door, he'd have a straight line to the cluster of desks, the children tucked behind, the man crouched in front. Miguel turned, slow and quiet, to face the door. The sunlight from the shattered window glinted against a line of aluminum chairs. Shadows flickered across the floor. Then, the handle turned. Miguel stood. No weapon, no shield but himself. He stepped forward, just 1 step, to stand directly in front of the row of desks. The door opened a crack. Then a sound. Not from the door. From behind him. A child. Crying now. Quiet but real. Miguel turned his body, instinctively widening his stance to block the sound, his arms slightly spread. He expected the shot. He waited for it. But what came instead was a voice. Low, rough, from behind the door. "I don't want to hurt them." Miguel said nothing. The voice faltered. "I didn't come to do this." Still, Miguel didn't speak. The door inched wider, revealing the man's silhouette. The gun hung low in his right hand. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes bloodshot. Miguel didn't look at the weapon. He looked at the man. "You don't have to," he said quietly. The man swallowed. "I lost everything. My job. My son doesn't talk to me. I came here thinking..." He stopped. The gun didn't rise. But it didn't fall either. Miguel took 1 small step forward. Not enough to challenge. Just enough to reach. "I know you're hurting," he said. "But this doesn't end it. It just passes the pain to someone else." The shooter blinked. Behind Miguel, a small hiccup of a sob. Then silence again. The gunman looked past him, just for a second. Then, his grip loosened. Miguel's voice didn't change. "Put it down!" Another long pause. Then, slowly, the gun lowered, touched the floor. He slid it forward. Miguel didn't move. Not yet. He waited. Then the man stepped back. just one step, shoulders sagging. From the hallway, the sound of approaching boots. Law enforcement. Miguel raised one hand, a silent signal, then turned to the children, still behind him, small faces peeking out from under the desk and arms wrapped tight around one another. "It's okay," he said softly. "It's over." But even as he said it, his knees gave out, and he sank slowly to the floor. Miguel sat slumped against the upturned desk, his breath coming in short, measured pulls. Not from fear now, not exactly, but from the sudden release of it. The moment had passed, and in its place came something heavier, something his body could finally feel. The adrenaline drained slowly, like rainwater finding its way out of a gutter after a storm. Around him, the children didn't rush to their feet. They stayed close, huddled together, eyes flickering from Miguel to the door and back again. Some of them still clutched each other's hands. A few had buried their faces in their arms. Then, down the hallway, a voice barked, "Clear! Clear!" Boots echoed. Radios hissed. A second voice, Officer Renee Skutsuk, called out, "Security guards inside!" Armed suspect surrendered. No visible injuries. Miguel heard it as though underwater. The words made sense, but they reached him muffled by exhaustion. The cafeteria door was pulled wide open. Flashlights swept the room even though the sun was bright now, spilling in through the shattered glass. The children winced at the sudden movement. A few began to cry softly, no longer holding it in. Miguel raised a hand, slow, controlled, to signal that they were okay. "He's down," Renee said as she knelt beside him. "You all right?" He nodded once. Her eyes scanned his body. "You're shaking." Miguel gave the faintest smile. "Just thawing." Behind her, other officers moved swiftly and gently. A teacher burst in from the hallway, eyes wide with terror and relief. She ran to the children, checking each one, her voice cracking with every whispered name. They all answered, every single one. Miguel watched as they were gathered up in quiet groups, held tightly, counted again and again. He leaned his head back against the side of the desk, closed his eyes for a moment, then felt a tug at his sleeve. He opened his eyes to see the girl with pigtails, the first one who'd moved when he told them to. She didn't speak, just held out a crumpled piece of paper. Miguel took it, unfolding it slowly. It was a drawing, done in soft crayon lines. Him standing in front of a wall of fire, the children drawn like stars behind him. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and whispered, "Thank you." Minutes passed in this half-silence. Sirens in the distance now, EMTs checking teachers, parents arriving like a flood of desperate hope. Miguel stood, slowly, helped by Renee. "You sure you don't want medics to take a look?" she asked. "I'm not shot," he replied. "Didn't say you were. I'm not broken either." But even as he said it, his legs felt unsteady. His body knew the cost of stillness under pressure. Outside, the school's front lawn had turned into a field of reunions. Parents knelt on the grass, holding their children like they were born again. Teachers stood in clusters, stunned into silence, eyes red-rimmed but scanning for anyone missing. Miguel stepped outside with Renee by his side. Applause broke out, not planned, not coordinated, just erupting. He wasn't sure who started it. He just stood there, unsure what to do with his hands, his face, his entire body. A mother ran up, tears streaming, voice cracked, and wrapped him in a hug before he could protest. Others followed, a dozen voices at once. "You saved my daughter." He was her shield. They said he didn't move. You were standing between them and him. Miguel shook his head. I just did what... But they didn't let him finish. One man said quietly, You did what heroes do. Miguel looked down at his shirt. Dusty, wrinkled, a tear near the shoulder. It didn't feel like a hero's uniform. He didn't feel like anything but tired. But he nodded. Because sometimes it's easier to nod than to explain that you were just a person who stayed when running might have been safer. The principal came forward then, Mr. Kaplan, voice still trembling, and clasped Miguel's hand with both of his. You gave them a chance, he said. You gave them back to us. Miguel looked around, saw the children safe, the school still standing, the sun overhead as if it had never considered leaving. And only then, as the weight of the morning finally settled, did a single tear run down his cheek. Not from fear, not from pain, but from the quiet knowledge that he'd stood where he needed to, when it mattered most. The news spread before Miguel ever got home. By the time the police were finished with their statements and the school was fully cleared and declared safe, local reporters had already begun piecing the story together. A few students had told their parents what happened. One teacher confirmed it. By afternoon, Miguel's name was on every channel from Channel 9 to the evening update on the regional affiliates. School security guard shields 19 children with his body. They had no footage, no cameras inside the cafeteria, but they had words, and the words were more than enough. They said he stood between bullets and children, that he spoke calmly to the gunman, that he never moved from his post, never wavered. They called him a guardian, a hero. Miguel, though, didn't hear most of it that day. By the time the first calls came in, he was already home, alone, sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a chipped coffee mug. His hands were still dirty, small flecks of dust under the nails, but he hadn't noticed. What he noticed, more than anything, was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the restful kind, the kind that echoes with what just happened. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the low creak of the house settling. All of it felt sharper now, too loud and too quiet at the same time. He didn't turn on the TV, didn't answer the phone. Let the world shout into the void while he sat there with his elbows on the table, wondering if anyone had taken the time to sweep the shattered glass from the cafeteria floor. He thought about the crayon drawing again, pulled it from his pocket, looked at the child's sketch, shaky lines, crooked stars. In it, he stood straight and tall, like someone sure of himself. He didn't feel like that man, not yet, and maybe that was okay. A knock came at the door. He ignored it at first, then another, softer this time. When he opened it, it wasn't a reporter or a police officer. It was an elderly man in a tan jacket, wrinkled face, kind eyes. Mr. Alvarez, the man asked. Miguel nodded cautiously. I just wanted to shake your hand. Miguel didn't move at first. The man went on. My granddaughter was in that cafeteria. You didn't know her name, didn't know any of them, but you chose to stay. That's not small. Miguel looked down, unsure of what to say. The man extended his hand again. Miguel finally took it. It was a short exchange. No long speeches, no camera flashes. Just one man saying thank you to another. And somehow, that made it more real than anything else. After the man left, Miguel stood at the door for a while, the screen open, a breeze moving through the hallway behind him. He stepped out onto the porch, watched the street. There were more people now, quietly driving past, slowing down when they reached his house. Some waved. One person honked gently, not a loud, celebratory blare, just a small, grateful note. He stayed out there until the sky began to fade from blue to dusk, not because he wanted to be seen, but because it felt like if he went inside, the day would end, and he wasn't ready for that yet. He wanted to hold it just a bit longer, not the fear, not the noise, but the stillness after, the kind that reminded him what mattered most. And as the light dimmed and the porch creaked beneath him, Miguel sat on the steps and whispered to no one in particular. They made it out. That was enough. For today, that was enough. Morning light came gently, but Miguel didn't sleep through the night. Sleep had come in short fragments, never long enough to rest, never deep enough to forget. Every time his eyes closed, the cafeteria returned. The sounds, the waiting, the silence after the final shot. But when dawn finally crept into the edges of the room, casting gold across the faded floorboards, he stood and made coffee. The mug still had yesterday's crack in it. He kept it anyway. At 7:40 a.m., the phone rang again. Not a number he recognized. But then, none of them had been familiar. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something told him to answer. "Mr. Alvarez," a woman's voice said. This is Elena Mateo from the Board of Education." He braced himself for questions, for policies, for formal reviews. But what followed surprised him. "We're calling to express our deep gratitude for your actions. What you did yesterday was extraordinary." Miguel didn't know how to respond. "I was just doing my job." "We don't train people for that," she said softly. "You did more than anyone could have asked. The superintendent would like to meet you, in person, if you're willing." Miguel hesitated. The idea of more eyes, more attention, didn't sit easily. But something in her tone, sincere, almost humbled, made him nod. "All right. We'll send someone to pick you up," she said. 2 hours later, he sat in a high-rise office for the first time in years. The walls were covered with awards, newspaper clippings, framed certificates of excellence. But the man across from him, Superintendent Harold Lang, didn't look like someone rehearsing a speech. He looked tired and grateful. "Miguel," he said, standing to shake his hand. "We ask a lot of people in schools these days. Too much, maybe. But what you gave without hesitation. You put yourself between 19 kids and a bullet." Miguel looked down. There wasn't time to think. Lang nodded. "Which is exactly why it matters." They talked for a while about procedures, the investigation, support teams being dispatched. But then Lang paused. "You know we're going to be hearing about this story for a long time," he said. "Local media's already calling you a hero. There's talk of awards, maybe even state recognition." Miguel tensed slightly. "That's not what I did it for." "I know. That's why it means something." Lang leaned forward. "But I want to ask you something else. If you're willing, I'd like you to speak to our school security teams. Not now, when you're ready. Just tell them what you did. Not in technical terms, in human ones." Miguel didn't answer right away. He wasn't a speaker. He wasn't even sure he could put it into words, but he nodded. "I'll think about it," he said. That evening, after the meeting, Miguel walked through the neighborhood near the school. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Past the local bakery, where someone had taped a handwritten note to the door. "Thank you, Miguel, for keeping our babies safe." Past the community center, where two teenage boys who usually hung out with hoodies pulled low, gave him a thumbs up and said, "Yo, you're the guy, right?" and passed the school itself, now quiet behind its locked gates. He stood outside the fence for a long moment, fingers resting on the cold metal. Inside, someone had placed 19 sunflowers in the cafeteria windowsill, one for each child. Miguel smiled faintly. He didn't need a ceremony. He didn't need speeches. But those sunflowers, they told the story better than words ever could. As the sun set behind the school and shadows stretched long across the pavement, Miguel finally turned and walked home. Not because the day had ended, but because for the first time since the shooting, he knew the world had not moved on. It had moved with him. 2 days after the incident, the letters began arriving. They came in all shapes: neatly folded notebook paper, brightly colored construction paper, envelopes covered in stickers. Most were from children, some from parents, a few from people Miguel had never met. The principal had gathered them into a single cardboard box and dropped them off herself. "I thought you might want these," she said, placing the box on Miguel's small kitchen table. He opened the lid slowly. At the top was a letter in blue marker. "Dear Mr. Miguel, thank you for being brave when we were scared. I was hiding behind the table, you were standing up. I saw your back, and I knew you were protecting us. My mom says you're like a superhero, but I think you're like my uncle. He's strong too." From Sophia, age 7. Miguel read it twice, then a third time. He reached into the box again. Some notes were simple. "Thank you," scrawled across crayon rainbows. Some were messy. Scribbles and stick figures, hearts and stars. One had a drawing of him with a shield, blocking what looked like dark clouds labeled "Bang Bang." And in each, there was something Miguel hadn't expected to find: healing. Not for the children, though that mattered most, but for himself. Each letter was a small thread pulling him back from the edge of what could have been despair. They didn't make him forget, but they reminded him what was saved. Later that evening, he found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He took out his father's old toolbox from the closet, found a hammer, a few clean nails, and on one quiet wall in his hallway, the one near the framed photo of his mother, he began pinning the letters. He didn't put them in order, didn't make them neat. He just let them bloom like wildflowers across the paint, crooked, colorful, alive. The hallway began to change. It no longer felt like a passage between rooms. It felt like something more, like a space where meaning lived. He would pass it every morning now, brushing his fingertips against the pages, not for pride, but for remembrance. The following morning, a local journalist knocked on his door. She was soft-spoken, carried a small notepad, no camera crew. "I was hoping you might speak with me. Just a short interview, nothing flashy." Miguel hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready." "I understand," she said. "It's just, your story has reached a lot of people. They want to understand the man behind the act." He looked at her, then back at the hallway of letters behind him. "I'm just a man who stood where he had to." She nodded. "That's enough." The article appeared online 2 days later. It was quiet, respectful. The headline simply read, "He didn't run. The story of Miguel Alvarez." It didn't recount every detail of the shooting. Instead, it focused on who Miguel was, the way he'd served the school for 7 years, how he fixed the broken benches himself on weekends, how he never missed a day unless he was sick enough to not stand. People read it, and more letters came, some from nearby, others from across the country. Each one carried the same message. You matter. You were seen. Miguel never asked for attention, but in that quiet wave of paper and ink, he found something unexpected. Community. Not in the public sense, not fame, but in the deeply personal sense of people reaching out to hold you up. That evening, as he sat on his porch with a cup of tea, he watched a group of kids ride their bikes past his house. One of them looked up, recognized him, and waved with both hands. Miguel smiled and lifted his fingers in return. It was a small moment, but it was enough. The official investigation into the shooting had begun swiftly. Detectives, school board officials, crisis counselors, news crews, they came in waves, each with a different purpose, each asking the same kinds of questions. What did you hear first? What made you move toward the cafeteria? Did you know the shooter? Did you see his face? Miguel answered with quiet honesty. No embellishments, no drama. He told them what he saw, what he did, what he felt in those moments. They scribbled notes, nodded, thanked him. Some lingered longer, asking off-the-record questions that felt more like curiosity than concern. He kept his responses even then, never drifting into speculation. Still, with each passing day, he felt the weight of the incident settling in, not as panic, not as nightmares, but as a silence, a deeper, slower quiet that lived between the sounds, between the boiling kettle and the clock ticking and the muted hum of life continuing on. One evening, the school district's trauma counselor visited. Her name was Diane. She was older, with silver hair and kind eyes. She sat across from him in the living room and didn't start with questions. She just said, "Tell me about the cafeteria." Miguel paused, then began. He didn't recount it the way he had for the police. He didn't talk about procedure or timing. He talked about the way the children had looked at him, the way they had reached for his hands, the way one of them, little Henry, had whispered, "Don't leave us," as he knelt in front of them. Diane listened without interruption. When he stopped, she only said, "And when the shots ended, what did you feel?" Miguel stared at the wall. "I felt like something in me had changed, like I'd crossed a line I didn't even see until I was on the other side of it." She nodded. "That's normal. Not easy, but normal." They spoke for nearly an hour, and at the end, she said something that stayed with him. "You didn't just protect them from bullets, Miguel. You protected them from the kind of fear that never leaves. They'll carry this, yes, but they'll carry the memory of your courage too. And that will matter more than you think." He nodded slowly, but didn't reply. Not then. Later that night, he stood in front of his bathroom mirror, looked at himself fully for the first time in days. Not just a glance, a long look. His hair had gone more gray than he remembered. The lines under his eyes were deeper. His face looked like it had been through a long storm, and maybe it had. But behind his reflection, through the open doorway, he could see the hallway, see the letters, and in that, something softened. He wasn't just the man who had stood in front of 19 children. He was also the man who was learning how to stand again after the fact. The man who, in silence, was becoming something new. Not a symbol, not a survivor, but a guardian. And in that quiet evolution, he found something else. Not peace exactly, but meaning. A week after the shooting, the school reopened. Not fully, not yet. Only staff and counselors were allowed inside. Repairs were still being made, bullet holes patched, broken tiles replaced, windows boarded up, waiting for glass. The cafeteria, where everything had happened, remained sealed off with caution tape. but the halls still smelled faintly of crayons and floor polish. Miguel stood at the entrance, unsure of how to step inside. The principal met him at the door. "There's no rush," she said gently. "But I wanted you to be part of this, if you're ready." Miguel nodded, his hand resting on the strap of the old satchel he always carried. It held his flashlight, his keys, his daily checklists, unchanged from before. He stepped inside. It was quiet, too quiet. Every footstep echoed slightly, as though the school itself was remembering. The custodial team was already at work. New security doors were being installed. A fresh coat of paint was being prepared for the cafeteria walls. Miguel didn't go near the cafeteria. Not yet. Instead, he walked the hallways slowly, past the art room with handprints still visible on the door, past the music room where students had hidden under chairs that day. Every hallway he passed through held echoes of fear and of survival. At the far end of the building, in a hallway that had once been just an ordinary corridor, he saw something new. A table had been set up. It was covered in small handwritten cards. On the wall behind it, someone had pinned a banner, "Heroes Among Us." And in the center of the table stood a simple framed photo. Miguel, taken just a few days before, not posed, just captured mid-smile. He stood there, unmoving. Behind him, the principal spoke quietly. The staff wanted to do something, a space for gratitude, for healing. Miguel blinked slowly. "I don't know if I deserve all this." She stepped beside him. "It's not about deserving. It's about recognizing." He didn't answer. He just looked. And then, after a moment, he reached down and adjusted the frame so it stood a little straighter. Later, in the faculty lounge, he was greeted with nods, soft smiles, a few hugs. The cafeteria staff gave him a warm empanada wrapped in foil. One teacher slipped a note into his hand. "You didn't just shield them. You shielded us all." He stayed only an hour, but before he left, he returned to the hallway where the memorial table stood. This time, he took one of the empty cards. He stood there for a while, pen hovering, and then he wrote, "To the children, I would do it again. Without hesitation, stay brave, stay kind. Mr. Miguel." He placed it gently at the front of the table. When he turned to leave, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. That night, back at home, he sat on his porch again. The stars were beginning to emerge, scattered like quiet reminders. A breeze moved through the trees. He thought about what it meant to be remembered, not just for what you did, but for the person you were in that moment. He didn't feel like a hero, but maybe that was the point. True heroes never do. The weeks moved slowly. School resumed, this time with more security, more drills, more eyes watching every hallway. But even with all that, or perhaps because of it, the atmosphere felt different. Fragile, like a thin layer of glass stretched over normalcy. Miguel returned to work, not because he was asked to, but because he needed to. The school was part of his rhythm, the hum of morning greetings, the clatter of lunch trays, the sound of sneakers on linoleum. It grounded him, yet he also knew things had changed. The children still ran to class, still laughed, but their eyes lingered longer on doors. They looked to him more often, as though confirming he was still there, and he always was. One morning, as he unlocked the north gate, a boy, no more than 9, approached and stood beside him quietly. Miguel glanced down. "You all right?" The boy nodded, then said softly, "You're the one who stopped the bad guy, right?" Miguel hesitated. "I didn't stop him. I just helped keep people safe." The boy was quiet a moment, then replied, "My mom says you were brave, but I think you were scared too." Miguel looked at him closely and smiled. "You're right." "Did it hurt?" Miguel's smile faded slightly. "It did. A little, but I'm okay now." The boy nodded, satisfied, and skipped off toward class. That small exchange stayed with him all day. The honesty, the simplicity. Children didn't need perfection, they just needed presence. That afternoon, Miguel began something new. After hours, once the school was empty, he walked the halls with a small notebook. He noted scuffed walls, flickering lights, but also a paper crane taped to a locker, a message in chalk on the sidewalk. "We love our school." A row of tiny shoes left neatly outside the art room. He wrote them down not as tasks, but as reminders of life continuing, of innocence reasserting itself. And every evening, he'd return home, sit by the window, and reread those notes. Not because he needed to fix them, but because they were proof that light remained. One particular afternoon, he found himself pausing outside the music room. Inside, a teacher was softly playing piano. A few students sat nearby, humming along. He didn't enter, just stood in the doorway. The melody wrapped around him like memory, like a language beyond words. When the song ended, the teacher saw him and smiled. "Come in, Mr. Alvarez," she said. "We're just making sound again." He stepped in slowly, nodding. "That's a good thing." The students looked up. One of them, Sophia, the girl who'd written the first letter, patted the bench beside her. Miguel sat, and for the first time since the incident, he didn't feel like a man carrying a memory. He felt like part of the present again. Spring crept in quietly. The trees lining the schoolyard began to bud, their branches edged with soft green. Children played again during recess, loud, clumsy, joyful. From the security booth, Miguel watched them. He didn't hover, didn't intrude, but his presence was felt, like a steady lighthouse on the edge of the yard. One afternoon, the principal approached with a request. "We're planning something," she said. "A day of gratitude for the staff, for the kids, for the community." Miguel nodded, not thinking much of it. "We'd like you to say something." He hesitated. "I'm not good with speeches." She smiled. "You don't have to be good, just honest." The idea sat in his chest for days, like a weight he couldn't shift. What could he say? What hadn't already been said in the cards, the nods, the silent glances from grateful parents? But the day came. A stage was set up on the field. Folding chairs were placed in neat rows. The school band played a few tentative songs. Parents arrived, holding coffee and hope. Miguel sat in the front row, stiff in a shirt someone had pressed for him. His hands were folded, resting on his lap. Names were called, certificates were given, and then, "Please welcome Mr. Miguel Alvarez." He stood slowly, walked to the microphone. For a moment, he said nothing, just looked out over the crowd. The students, the teachers, the parents. Many of the children he'd shielded sat near the front. They waved. He saw Sophia, Henry, the little boy who'd asked if it hurt. He cleared his throat. "I don't have fancy words," he began. "I'm not a teacher. I don't have a degree in anything." A quiet chuckle from the audience. "I'm just a man who loves this school, who loves these kids." He paused. And when the moment came, I didn't think. I just moved. Because that's what we do for each other. We show up. We stand in the way when we have to. The breeze stirred. I wish none of this had happened. I wish those kids never had to see what they saw. His voice trembled slightly. He didn't hide it. But I am grateful. Grateful they're still here. Grateful for every laugh I hear in the halls. Grateful for every drawing taped to the wall, every note left in a locker. He looked down, then up again. Being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about moving anyway. And if I could go back and do it again, I would. Every single time. He stepped back. No applause erupted. Not right away. Just silence. Full. Deep. Then someone stood. A teacher. Then a student. Then the entire audience. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was slow. Like the turning of pages. Like a breath being held and finally released. Later, as the crowd dispersed, people came up, shook his hand, thanked him again. But what stayed with him most was what came next. As he walked back toward the building, a small group of students followed him. "Mr. Alvarez," one of them asked, "can we help you do rounds?" He looked at them. 6 kids, maybe 11 or 12. He raised an eyebrow. "Rounds." "Yeah," said one. "Like, walk the halls, make sure everything's okay." He paused, then nodded, and together they began. Down the hallway, past the classrooms, past the music room where laughter spilled like sunlight. And in that moment, Miguel understood something deeper than all the speeches and signs. He wasn't just protecting anymore. He was passing something on. A quiet courage, a gentle vigilance, a way of being that said, "We look after one another." The quiet routine of life settled in again. Spring gave way to early summer, and with it, the end of the school year loomed. But this year's end felt different. There was a gravity to it, a quiet sense that something had been endured, and that endurance deserved to be marked. For Miguel, each day brought new signs of healing. A chalk drawing on the blacktop that read, "We are brave." A hallway bulletin board filled with portraits drawn by students, not of superheroes in capes, but of teachers, janitors, cafeteria staff. And yes, even one of him, holding a set of keys like they were magic wands. But one afternoon, as he was walking the perimeter, the principal pulled him aside. "There's something we'd like to do," she said. "With your permission." He raised an eyebrow. She led him to the front of the school, where a group of staff stood gathered beneath the old flagpole. Next to it was a large object draped in cloth. "We've talked with the board," she said, "and with the families." A few students stood nearby, holding small bouquets of paper flowers. Then the cloth was drawn back. It was a bronze plaque, mounted on a simple stone base. It read, "To Miguel Alvarez, who stood without fear so others could live." Beneath the words was an engraved image, not dramatic, not stylized. Just Miguel, crouched behind a cafeteria table, arms outstretched, students behind him. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The air felt thick, heavy with memory. One of the students, Sophia, stepped forward and placed a flower at the base. "We wanted you to have a place here forever," she said. "So even when we grow up, we'll remember what you did." Miguel knelt beside her, not to speak, just to be eye level. After a moment, he said, "I didn't want any of this. I only wanted you all to be safe," Sophia nodded. "That's why it matters." That night, he sat longer than usual on his porch. He traced the edge of the program handed to him at the small ceremony, folded it neatly, placed it inside the notebook where he kept other little things, cards, drawings, notes. Then he pulled out a page from the back and began to write. But this time, not just memories. He wrote a message to the future, to whoever might come next. You may never know when your moment will come, but if it does, be still. Listen. The right thing will call your name, and if you answer it with love, you will not be alone. He folded the note and tucked it into an envelope. On the front, he simply wrote, "To the next guard." And then he smiled, because he knew this story was not ending. It was only deepening. Summer arrived in waves of heat and cicada song. The school fell quiet, its halls emptied of footsteps and laughter. Windows were propped open to breathe, and chairs sat stacked like watchful sentinels. Miguel still came in. He checked locks, walked the grounds, watered the garden that some students had planted near the playground fence. The quiet suited him, but the stillness also gave space for reflection. And with it, a strange weight returned. Memories, not loud, not sharp, just lingering. The cafeteria, the table, the sound of his own heartbeat against silence. He would stand there sometimes, not to relive it, but to remind himself, it was real, it happened, and I'm still here. One morning, as he adjusted a loose window frame, the assistant principal stopped by. "We're hosting a summer workshop," she said. "Safety and resilience training for staff across the district." Miguel wiped his hands. "Sounds useful." She smiled. "They want you to speak." He tilted his head. "I'm not a trainer." "No," she said. "You're something better. You lived it, and you stayed." At first he declined. Public speaking still felt too large, too exposed. But days passed, and something tugged at him. Not ego, responsibility. Because if he didn't share what he had learned, not from manuals, but from the marrow, who would? So he agreed. The auditorium was modest. A few dozen chairs, clipboards, coffee cups, faces of teachers, janitors, counselors, people like him. Miguel stepped up slowly. He didn't carry notes, only a memory. And he began not with the shooting, but with a quieter moment. "I want to tell you about a little girl," he said. "Sophia. She hid under the table with me, and she kept whispering that her brother was in the hallway. She wanted to run. I told her to wait, to breathe, to hold still." He paused. She did, and he was okay. And so was she. The room was silent. "Courage doesn't always look like running into danger," he continued. "Sometimes it looks like staying, like shielding, like stillness in the face of chaos." He talked about posture, about listening to instinct, about how fear sharpens and how clarity comes in the breath between panic and action. He shared how he hadn't slept for nights afterward, how he carried the smell of dust and silence on his clothes, but also how a single note from a student, "Thank you for standing still," reminded him that survival wasn't the end of the story. Healing was. After he finished, no one clapped right away. But slowly, people began to stand. A ripple of quiet acknowledgement. Later, someone from another school approached him in the parking lot. "My school doesn't have a guard," she said. "But we have people who care. I just didn't know how much we mattered. Now I do." Miguel nodded, because that was the heart of it. You didn't need a badge. You didn't need a title. You just needed to show up, fully, fiercely, when it mattered. And sometimes, that was enough. July rolled in hot and breathless, the kind of heat that shimmered off pavement and slowed even the birds. Miguel still walked the perimeter, hat pulled low, water bottle in hand. The school felt like a shell, hollowed for summer, waiting to fill again with life. But one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A car pulled into the empty parking lot. A woman stepped out. Young, mid-20s, her eyes scanned the building as if trying to piece together a place only seen from the outside. Miguel approached, cautious but kind. "Can I help you?" She smiled, soft but unsure. "I'm sorry to bother you. I had to come." He waited. "My brother was here," she said. During what happened." He nodded slowly. "What's his name?" "Eli Mendoza," Miguel remembered. A quiet boy, always wore a red hoodie. He'd huddled under the bench near the back exit. Miguel had found him shaking, but unhurt. "He's okay," she continued. "Better even. Talking more, sleeping through the night, but he doesn't like coming back here. So I came instead." Miguel gestured toward the bench just inside the gate. They sat. She pulled out her phone, scrolled, held it up. It was a picture of Eli holding a sketch pad. "He's drawing now," she said. "Heroes, not the comic kind. Real ones." She looked at Miguel. "You're in most of them." He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Then quietly she added, "He told me you didn't run. That when everything was chaos, you stayed. That he saw your back, and it made him feel safe." A long pause stretched between them. Then she reached into her bag and handed him a folded page. "Eli wanted you to have this." It was a drawing, pencil on rough paper. Miguel stood behind a group of children, arms wide, eyes calm. Above the image, Eli had written, "The guard who was a wall." Miguel held it carefully, as if it might crumble from the weight of meaning. "Thank him for me," he said. "I will." She stood, smiled again, and walked to her car. Miguel watched until she disappeared down the road, the dust lifting behind her like memory stirred. That evening, he framed the drawing, hung it on his wall at home, next to a shelf of modest things: his grandfather's radio, a pair of worn gloves, the notebook where he still wrote reflections when sleep wouldn't come. And that night, before bed, he wrote again. "Sometimes you become something you never set out to be, not by title, not by design, but by the space you hold when others cannot. You become a wall, a shield, a quiet vow." He paused, tapping the pen lightly on the desk, then added, "And you keep holding it, even when no one is watching. Because that's what heroism looked like now. Not in grand gestures, but in constancy, in staying, in the soft, enduring act of showing up." The summer waned. July gave way to August, and with it, the anticipation of return. The school began to stir again, not with students yet, but with the low hum of preparation. Teachers returned early, setting up classrooms. Custodians scrubbed away the dust of months. The rhythm of life slowly returned. Miguel watched it all quietly. He moved through halls still tinged with echoes, making sure doors latched, cameras worked, locks held firm. He wasn't the same man from a year ago. And the school, it wasn't the same place. Some families had moved away. A few students transferred. But most came back. Because the story of what happened here didn't just scar them, it also shaped them. It became a story not of fear, but of someone who stayed, of a shield that held. One day, in the early haze of morning, Miguel entered the cafeteria and paused. Someone had painted a mural on the far wall. Bright colors, broad strokes. It showed a tree, roots deep, branches wide. Beneath it, small figures of children sat reading, talking, smiling. And near the center, almost hidden beneath the leaves, a man stood, arms out, steady, quiet. No face, just the shape of presence. A small line beneath it read, "Some trees grow strong because someone stood still." Miguel stared at it for a long while, then turned to find the art teacher watching from the doorway. "The kids did most of it," she said softly. "They wanted to show what safety feels like." He didn't need to reply. He just nodded, a quiet thank you shared through silence. That afternoon, during a break, Miguel sat outside beneath the shade of a tree, not unlike the one in the mural. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, and he let his mind drift. Not to the day of the shooting, but to the days after, to the small acts. A student handing him a thank you note, a teacher leaving coffee on his desk with a smile, parents offering tight-lipped nods, eyes filled with something too big to name. He realized something then. The weight he carried, it wasn't just his. It had been lifted in pieces by others, and in return, he had helped carry theirs. Healing, it seemed, was not a destination. It was an exchange. That evening, he received a letter from the district, an invitation to speak at a state conference on school safety. He held the envelope for a long time before opening it. He didn't answer right away, because the story, his story, wasn't finished yet. There were still quiet corners to tend to, still moments to show up for, still people to protect. But for the first time, he began to imagine what sharing might feel like, not as burden, but as offering. Not to relive, but to illuminate. Because maybe somewhere, another guard was waiting for the moment when they'd have to decide. And maybe, just maybe, a story like his could help them stay. The first day of school came with golden light and the sound of backpacks rustling like leaves. Children poured in, some running, some clinging to parents. There were hugs, waves, a few quiet tears. Life returning in all its color and clatter. Miguel stood by the gate just as he always had. His vest was clean, his clipboard in hand. But his eyes, they scanned the crowd differently now. Not out of fear, but with a quiet vow. To see, to know the faces he'd once shielded only in silhouette. To learn their names, their smiles, the way their eyes lit up when they felt safe. Sophia walked in, now taller, her hair braided with a pink ribbon. She waved at him, not shy this time, and he smiled back. "Hey, Mr. Miguel," she called. "Morning, Sophia." Behind her came Eli, his red hoodie replaced with a blue backpack dotted with pins. He glanced up, met Miguel's eyes, and gave a nod. No words, just knowing. Inside, the school felt different. New banners, painted walls, the scent of fresh supplies. And yet beneath it all, the memory of what had been, not looming, but woven into the very air, like threads in a tapestry. During recess, a new teacher approached Miguel. "I've heard about you," she said. "From staff, from parents." He shrugged lightly. "Stories get around." She smiled. "They said you're the reason they sleep a little easier." Miguel looked out at the playground. Children ran, laughed, tumbled into each other like rolling marbles. He thought of that moment, that morning in the cafeteria. The weight of 19 lives pressing into his back as gunshots rang out. He thought of standing still when everything inside him screamed to run. And now? Now he stood for them again. Not in crisis, but in presence. Later that week, the school hosted a welcome assembly. The principal gave updates, introduced staff, invited applause for the PTA. Then, with a pause, she looked toward Miguel. "We have someone here who doesn't stand on the stage," she said, "but who has stood for us in every way that matters." Miguel blinked. She continued. "He doesn't ask for thanks, but we're giving it anyway." The room erupted in applause. Not the polite kind, but the full, rising, grateful kind. The kind that echoes, not from hands, but from hearts. Miguel stood where he was. He didn't step forward, didn't wave. He just nodded once. And the students closest to him, the ones who had hidden that day, the ones who had come back, they clapped the hardest. That night, As he walked the halls one last time before locking up, he paused in the cafeteria. The table was still there, clean now, moved slightly, but still the same. He rested a hand on it, then turned off the lights. The room went dark, but not empty. Because some lights, once sparked, live on inside people. And Miguel, the man who stood still, carried that light now. Steady, unseen, and always, always watching. Autumn brought quieter mornings. The chaos of the new school year had settled into rhythm. Bells, laughter, hallway footsteps like soft drum beats. Miguel's days returned to routine, unlocking gates before sunrise, walking the perimeter, greeting students by name. But beneath that routine, something had shifted. He no longer moved through the school like a shadow. Now, he moved like part of its foundation. In October, he began volunteering in small ways, helping Coach Thompson with after-school traffic, repairing the cracked bench near the playground, even reading to third graders on rainy afternoons. His voice low, steady, the way he spoke when calming storms. Children began seeking him out, to say hi, to ask questions, to hand him drawings and crumpled notes. One boy, Luis, came to him one morning clutching a paper. "It's you," he said, grinning. "I drew your superpower." Miguel glanced down. It was a sketch of him holding an umbrella that stretched over the entire school. Rain fell hard outside the line of the umbrella. But inside, sunlight. Miguel smiled. "What's the power called?" Luis thought for a moment. "Staying. 2 syllables. That was it." Miguel folded the drawing and placed it in his pocket. He'd keep it, like the others. By mid-fall, the school hosted a community night. Parents, teachers, students, a celebration of safety, resilience, and growth. There were booths, food, laughter echoing through the gym. Miguel wasn't planning to stay, but Principal Alvarez stopped him by the exit. "You're part of this," she said gently. And so he stayed. Watched as kids tugged their parents toward murals, toward posters that told the story of the school's transformation. At one table, a video looped. It was a quiet montage. No dramatic music, just images, smiling children, newly painted classrooms, and one moment, a photo taken from security footage during the day of the shooting. Miguel, kneeling, arms outstretched, shielding the children beneath him. He hadn't known it existed. Beside the screen, a sign read, "Courage isn't loud. Sometimes it looks like stillness." Parents stood silently watching, some with tears, others with quiet reverence. Miguel stepped back, heart heavy and full. He thought of how far they'd come, not just the school, but himself, from that instant of terror to this gathering of hope, from acting on instinct to carrying the story forward, piece by piece. Later that night, after the last car pulled away, Miguel sat alone on the front steps. The stars were faint above the streetlights, but they were there. He pulled out his notebook and wrote one sentence. "Today didn't need a shield, but it still needed me." And he closed the book, resting it on his lap, content in the quiet. The hero wasn't the man who stopped bullets. The hero, perhaps, was the one who returned each day, to watch, to guard, to stay. Winter crept in gently. There was no snow in this part of the state, just the hush of shorter days and cool air that wrapped around the school like a shawl. Miguel noticed the shift. Fewer shouts on the playground, more kids bundled in jackets, the sound of dry leaves skipping across the asphalt. He adjusted his morning rounds to account for the darkness. Earlier lights on, longer pauses at corners. He walked the grounds like a sentinel wrapped in wool and memory. December brought questions, some subtle, some direct. The district asked if he'd speak again, this time for a wider audience, a national forum on school safety. A principal from another county reached out. She'd heard about him, wanted advice, not on drills, but on presence. Even a parent stopped him one morning, just before drop-off. "My daughter says you make her feel braver." Miguel wasn't sure how to carry these words. They felt bigger than him, but he held them anyway. On the final day before winter break, the school held a quiet ceremony. No big stage, no speeches, just the staff and students gathered in the courtyard with cocoa and music and warm lights strung overhead. A fifth grader stepped forward to read something she'd written, a poem. It spoke of shadows and light, of fear and the people who make it softer. She ended with a line that silenced the courtyard. "Some heroes don't fly. They wait, they stand, they hold the sky." Miguel felt the air still around him, and he didn't look down this time. He looked out and met the eyes of teachers, of children, of parents, each reflecting something back that he hadn't dared name. Honor. Not the medal kind, but the lived kind. Later that night, as he closed the gate one last time before the holiday, he walked the path slowly. The mural in the cafeteria remained. The drawing from Luis still sat in his locker, and in his notebook, now worn at the corners, he added another line. Holding doesn't always mean stopping something. Sometimes it means letting something keep going. He thought of the students, 19 that day. Now dozens more, each growing, laughing, learning, living, because someone had held the line. As he stepped into the stillness of the evening, Miguel didn't feel like a man who had survived something terrible. He felt like a man who had built something out of it. Not with bricks or banners, but with being there, day after day, a human rhythm, a living shield. And as the stars blinked open above the dark parking lot, he whispered a quiet promise. "I'll be here." Not as a statue of the past, but as a keeper of futures, one breath at a time. The new year brought rain, steady, soft, cleansing, the kind that made the pavement shimmer and the air smell like fresh beginnings. Miguel stood at his post, hood pulled low, water dripping from his sleeves. He didn't mind. Rain made the world quieter, more focused. That morning, Sophia ran past him and paused. "You still write in your book?" Miguel smiled. "Every day." "What do you write?" He thought for a moment, then knelt beside her. "Whatever the day gives me." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense, then ran off again, her boots splashing, laughter trailing behind. Inside the building, Principal Alvarez called him into her office. He hesitated, not out of fear, but curiosity. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter from the district superintendent. It spoke of exceptional dedication, of model guardianship, of a new program, Community Courage Fellows, and how Miguel had been selected as its first member. There was funding for him to visit other schools, speak with staff, share not only his story, but his presence. Miguel stared at the paper. He didn't feel like a fellow. He felt like a man who'd done one thing, stood still. But maybe that was exactly the point. Later, he sat in the library, not many kids around. The rain pattered outside. He opened his notebook and wrote a single word at the top of the page: legacy. He thought of it not as an end, but as a thread, woven through children's voices, through classroom walls, through the courage of one morning and the quiet of everyone since. That week, he visited a nearby elementary school. It was smaller, older. The staff gathered in the gym as he spoke. He didn't use dramatic words, no raised voice, no slideshow. He told them about the desk, about the silence between shots, about the weight of 19 small backs pressing against his spine, and about what came after. The long breath of surviving, the longer work of staying. When he finished, no one clapped at first. They just sat. Then one by one, they stood. And Miguel stood with them, not in the spotlight, but in the circle. Later, back at his own school, a kindergartner tugged at his coat. "You're the brave guy," she said. He crouched low. "I'm the stay guy." She considered that, then nodded. "That's even better." And somehow, Miguel believed her. As spring approached, the air shifted again, warmer, lighter. Children played louder, and Miguel, he kept walking the hallways, not looking for danger, but holding space. With every nod, every notebook scribble, every quiet pause at the door, he became something more than a guard. He became part of the architecture of hope. A man who stood not in front of bullets, but behind every moment that followed. Under the gentle spring sunset, Miguel sat on his porch steps, his gaze drifting toward the school in the distance. The laughter of children echoed through the air, blending with the soft breeze carrying the scent of fresh grass. The memories of that fateful day no longer weighed him down. They had become a deep part of his soul, a reminder of the strength of steadfastness and the love he held for the children he had protected. The school still stood, resilient like a witness, its walls now marked with traces of hope and unity. The letters, the drawings, the smiles, all had become a warm flame that lit his heart through the darkest days. He sought no glory, only wishing for the children to grow up in peace, carrying that spirit into their lives. Miguel took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through him. He knew his journey wasn't over. There were still days to protect, moments to share. As the sky darkened, he whispered, "I'll be here until I'm no longer needed." And in that silence, he found peace, not through forgetting, but through acceptance, where love and courage walked hand in hand forever.